Attack on Titan has had a fair handful of different video game adaptations, the most prominent being a series of console and PC games known simply as Attack on Titan and Attack on Titan 2. They're a pair of action Musou games with a focus on putting you directly in the action with its ODM gear gameplay. However, there's a new game that recently released that puts you directly in the role of a cadet in the Attack on Titan world with the most immersive experience yet, that being Attack on Titan VR Unbreakable. It was first released as an early access game on the MetaQuest 2, 3, and Pro on July 23, 2024, but it's recently had its official complete release. And while the gameplay is fun, I don't know if I'd consider it a complete edition because it's riddled with its own issues and a pricing scheme that borders on being a scam. So let's dive into those issues and more in Attack on Titan VR Unbreakable. The gameplay is where Attack on Titan VR excels. The first two Attack on Titan games did a great job at translating the traversal of the ODM gear into a video game, but for this game, they need to make it so you actually feel like you're swinging around, and I gotta say, it's pretty close. You're able to walk around with a joystick and can manually rotate the camera with the other joystick, but the main mode of travel is going to be with the anchor system. You're able to aim each anchor independently by simply moving your arms around. You can then fire each anchor and pull your arm back to reel in, allowing you to swing forward. You can choose to shoot these two anchors in separate locations or at the same target, which allows you to quickly zip to that one place. In addition to these basic swinging mechanics, if you hit a target with your anchors and begin reeling towards it, you can use your left joystick to maneuver side to side in the air, or press down on the right joystick to boost straight ahead. You can also press the left joystick to boost straight up. However, all these additional movements use gas, which is a meter that once fully depleted will automatically refill after a couple of seconds. When it comes to combat, you get to physically swing in order to swing your blades to attack Titans. However, your blades will eventually get worn out and you'll need to reload them. By pressing X or B, you can drop your dull blades, then simply move your hands down to automatically reload them. Another quirk of the combat is that once you get close enough to the Titan's nape, you'll enter slow motion, which gives you time to swing and attack. The controls, while difficult to learn, are pretty fun. You do need to take time to get used to them, which is why there is a training mode, but you can get the hang of them fairly quickly, and once you do, it becomes pretty fun to swing around. However, there are some issues with them. While it is fun, I feel like it's lacking a level of intricacy, as there are some maneuvers that you just can't do. For example, if you're swinging low towards a building, there's no way to manually swing yourself up, as you automatically swing up only towards the end of a movement, which means you can just crash into a building because there's no way for you to move up. So while it is fun to control, it's not perfect. But let's figure out how it works in actual combat situations. Facing Titans, like maneuvering, takes time to learn and get used to, but once you do, it's pretty fun. Like I mentioned earlier, be able to hook onto the Titan's nape and maneuver around them before dashing in to attack. But you can also attack them by swinging any which way, as you don't have to be anchored to them to actually attack them. And this freedom of choice is good because you're able to move around and plan your attacks however you choose to. One of my complaints with the Titans in this game though, is the health bars. Every body part of every Titan has a health bar, where I wish they would have done it like the console games, where the standard Titans do not, but the more powerful ones do. The reason being that it becomes incredibly tedious to swing around a Titan a bajillion times to chip away its health bar, when in the show, most cadets can one-shot a standard sized Titan. Another mechanic of fighting Titans is that if you get hurt by getting grabbed, you can try to free yourself by cutting off their fingers, which is yet another health bar. But while you're grabbed, you're gradually losing health. My problem with this is it never really tells you what you're supposed to do to cut off their fingers, rather you just flail your arms around and hope that it's working. When it comes to losing health, there is no health bar for yourself, as your health is simply indicated by a red border around your vision and a decrease in saturation. There's no medkits or anything. In order to heal you, you just need to stay out of combat for a few seconds. This leads to my next complaint, which is that there's no resource management. You do have a finite number of blades that can be restocked by collecting more scattered around the map, but that's about it. I wish this would have applied to both gas and health as well. Make it so you have a finite number of gas and must find more canisters, and make it so you can heal by finding and using medkits. Part of the terror of the show and the challenge of the console games is managing your limited number of resources, so in a game where you're supposed to be directly in the role of a character in the show, that fear should translate over. All that being said, the most important part of any game is that it's fun to play. And Attack on Titan VR does accomplish that, except it's not very fun to look at. For context, I'm playing this on a Quest 2 and have captured the footage by casting it to my PC, so if there's lag in the gameplay, it's mainly because of the casting connection. That being said, there are still some native performance issues. It will occasionally stutter or have a frame drop here and there, but my main issue with the presentation is that it just looks cheap. Somehow, the game is fully voice acted in both Japanese and English, but they decide to cut corners visually. You start off with a fully immersive cutscene that, while it does have its own problems, such as your character becoming spontaneously invisible, was still pretty cool to look at. But afterwards, most future cutscenes are just a frozen frame of one character model on a 3D background in a frame in a void. They couldn't have even bothered to actually put you in the environment, which is already modeled. The graphics themselves are alright, the textures aren't too high quality, but again, I am playing on the Quest 2, so I can forgive it. Same thing with the models. The character models look pretty good for the most part, but the Titan models are a little rough around the edges. But I can forgive most of these visual drawbacks, as in order to ensure that it runs properly, they do need to cut some corners here and there. But what I can't forgive is the pricing scheme, which is just absolutely ridiculous. The biggest problem with Attack on Titan VR Unbreakable is its business model, and by extension, its amount of content. The game was first available for purchase on July 23rd, 2024 for $5 as part of its early access. Now, since it was early access, there wasn't a lot of content available, which is understandable. There was the campaign, which only included 10 missions alongside a training mode, and the only unlockables were a handful of different blade variants. But this was a-okay because they priced it accordingly at $5. I'd say for the amount of fun you could get out of this game, it was definitely worth the price, even if all you wanted to do was swing around and fight titans. Fast forward to December 17th, 2024, and Attack on Titan VR Unbreakable launches its complete edition, and this is where the problems arise. For some reason, they've broken the official 1.0 build of the game into two different parts. You can either buy a bundle considered the complete edition that includes both parts for $20. You can buy part 1 by itself for $8, or you can buy part 1 for $8, then part 2 separately for $12, because you have to have part 1 in order to play part 2. So what does any of this actually mean? Part 1 includes everything that was in the early access version of the game, but now it costs $8 when it costs $5 during the early access period, which I'd say is a fair markup. Now, Part 2 includes a plethora of new content and game modes. It includes more campaign missions, including a battle against the Armored Titan. It includes a new survival mode, which sees you going against 100 Titans. A new co-op multiplayer option, where you can play every single campaign mission with a friend or another random player, and 3 new weapon types. This seems like a lot of new content, and one of the chief complaints of the early access / part 1 version of the game was that it was missing a lot of content. While yes, the gameplay was fun, it just wasn't engaging enough because once you beat the handful of missions available, there wasn't much else to do. Multiplayer, survival, more campaign missions, and more unlockables was exactly what this game needed. But here's the problem with that. Why did they release this as a separate add-on? On their website, they say, and I quote, "If you purchased early access, you will not need to purchase it again for part 2. This led myself and many others to believe that if you bought the game during early access, then you would be given access to part 2 and all of its corresponding content once it launched, and that's not what happened at all. Once part 2 launched, if you had the early access version, then you didn't get any of that. It was as if you only purchased part 1 and only had access to part 1's content, which, as I mentioned before, is the exact same content as early access. To be completely fair, their wording is vague enough that it can be interpreted as saying that if you bought early access, then you won't need to buy part 1 in order to be able to purchase part 2, because you do need part 1 to purchase part 2. But I have a feeling they knew exactly what they were doing and that this was going to be easily misinterpreted. And if you don't believe me, and you just think I'm stupid for reading this notice wrong, look at all of the reviews on the Metastore. All of the top reviews are 5-star reviews talking about how great this game is and how it's a great deal for $5. Then, if you sort by new, and look at all of the new, recent reviews, they're all pretty much negative and complaining about how players were tricked into thinking they would have access to part 2 if they bought the early access. I understand exactly why the devs did this, because now they can get early access players to pay double what they did originally in order to experience the full game. But this is just an awful decision that's completely anti-consumer. This had the exact opposite effect, because now players are turned off from the game and are going to give a bad name because you tricked them into buying early access thinking they would be given the full game on launch, then forcing them to buy DLC in order to actually play the complete game. And if these devs weren't bad enough, there have been a number of fan-made Attack on Titan VR games over the years, which have been forced to be shut down because of the development of this official Attack on Titan VR game. So they initially won players over with that low barrier to entry of $5, but then they pulled a bait and switch where they now expect players to pay double what they already paid for DLC that should have just been a free update when the full game launched. Attack on Titan VR Unbreakable has a lot of positives. It's an official Attack on Titan VR game that can run natively on the MetaQuest family of systems, it's got fun gameplay that really immerses you in the world of Attack on Titan, and it's got full voice casting in Japanese and English. But the devs squandered any good faith they had earned with their player base with the shutting down of fan-made games and the abhorrent bait-and-switch pricing scheme. If they went back and gave everyone who purchased the Early Access Part 2 for free, then I could forgive them, and this would be a pretty solid game. But as it stands, Attack on Titan VR Unbreakable is a pretty subpar game that's lacking in a lot of content and scammed its own player base with a pretty greedy bait-and-switch tactic. I want to go play the vastly superior anime VR game instead, One Piece Grand Cruise. Damn it.